My name is Sloane Mitchell, and I'm 28 years old. Last weekend, I walked into my high school reunion wearing a custom Armani suit and carrying legal documents that would destroy my parents' perfect reputation forever. The same parents who abandoned me on graduation night, leaving me with nothing but a note saying I was no longer their responsibility. What they didn't know was that their golden boy brother, my Uncle Marcus, had been secretly funding my Harvard law degree for the past decade. And now, I had proof that everything they built their success on was stolen from me. But before I tell you how I served the coldest dish of revenge at a high school gymnasium, let me know where you're watching from. Are you Team Justice or Team Forgiveness? Hit that like button if you believe karma always comes back around. And don't forget to subscribe, because this story has more twists than a legal thriller. Trust me, you'll want to see how a girl with nothing became the woman who brought down an empire built on lies. Growing up in the Mitchell household was like living in a perfectly curated Instagram post. Everything looked flawless from the outside, but the reality was suffocating. My parents, Richard and Caroline Mitchell, were the epitome of suburban success. Dad owned 3 luxury car dealerships across Connecticut, while Mom ran a high-end interior design firm that catered to Greenwich's elite. They lived for appearances, charity galas, and making sure everyone knew just how successful the Mitchell family was. I was their only child, and from the moment I could walk, I was groomed to be their crowning achievement. Piano lessons at 4, French tutoring at 6, debate team captain by 14. My childhood was a carefully orchestrated performance designed to reflect their status. But beneath all that polish, I felt like a stranger in my own home. The cracks started showing during my junior year of high school. My grades were perfect: 4 gigapascals, valedictorian, track early admission to Yale, locked in. But instead of pride, I noticed something else in my parents' eyes: resentment. It started with small comments. "Well, aren't you just perfect?" Mom would say with a tight smile when I brought home another award. Just like her Uncle Marcus, Dad would mutter, and something dark would flash across his face. Uncle Marcus was Dad's younger brother, and he was everything my father wasn't. Where Dad was ruthless in business, Marcus was ethical. Where Dad chased money, Marcus pursued knowledge. He'd graduated summa cum laude from Harvard, became a successful patent attorney, and somehow managed to stay humble through it all. He was also the only family member who seemed to genuinely care about me as a person, not as a reflection of family success. During family gatherings, I'd catch my parents exchanging loaded glances whenever Marcus praised my achievements. There was definitely tension there, some old wound that never healed. But I was 17 and focused on my future. I had no idea that their jealousy ran so deep it would eventually consume our entire relationship. The real breaking point came 3 months before graduation. I'd been working on my valedictorian speech, something meaningful about perseverance and family support. I was in Dad's study using his computer because mine had crashed when I accidentally opened the wrong folder. What I found changed everything. Bank statements, dozens of them. But these weren't for the dealerships or Mom's design firm. These were personal accounts I'd never heard of. Accounts with massive deposits dating back 15 years, all from something called MK, Patent Holdings. My heart started racing as I scrolled through the documents. M.K. Marcus. Kenneth Marcus. There were contracts, licensing agreements, and correspondence that painted a picture I never could have imagined. My Uncle Marcus hadn't just been successful, he'd been sending my parents money for years. Massive amounts. Enough to fund their entire lifestyle, their businesses, everything. I thought they'd built themselves. But that wasn't the worst part. As I dug deeper, I found emails between my parents discussing me. "She's getting too smart," Mom had written. "Too much like Marcus. What if she starts asking questions?" Dad's response made my blood run cold. "Don't worry. After graduation, she's on her own. We've played the perfect parents long enough. I sat in that leather chair staring at the screen, feeling my entire world crumble. Everything was a lie. Their success, their pride in me, their love, all of it was built on money from the uncle they clearly resented, and I was just another burden they were planning to shed. That night I called Marcus. I told him I'd found some financial documents and asked if he could explain them. The silence on the other end of the line lasted so long I thought he'd hung up. When he finally spoke, his voice was heavy with guilt and resignation. "Sloane, there are things about your family that you don't understand," he said carefully. "Things I probably should have told you years ago." Marcus asked me to meet him at a small diner outside town somewhere we wouldn't be seen. When I arrived, he looked older than I'd ever seen him, like he'd been carrying a weight for years and was finally ready to set it down. "Your father and I haven't spoken honestly in over 20 years, he began, stirring his coffee absently. "It started when we were kids. Richard was always the charming one, the one everyone loved, but he was also morally flexible. I was the nerd, the one who actually did the work while he took credit for it. He told me about their college years, how Dad had stolen Marcus's senior thesis and used it to land his first job, how Dad had borrowed money for his first dealership and never paid it back. But the real betrayal came later, when Marcus invented a revolutionary diagnostic tool for luxury vehicles, something that would make any mechanic's job easier and more accurate. I was young, naive, and I trusted my brother," Marcus continued. "I let Richard handle the business side while I focused on the technical aspects. He convinced me to put the patent under a shared company name, said it would be easier for family business purposes. Within 6 months, Dad had filed paperwork, transferring full ownership of the patent to himself. By the time Marcus realized what had happened, the diagnostic tool was being licensed to major automotive companies worldwide, generating millions in revenue, all of it flowing into my father's accounts. I could have sued him," Marcus said, his voice barely above a whisper. "Could have destroyed him. But he was my brother and, well, then, you came along." That's when I learned the truth about my parents' relationship with Marcus. The money transfers I'd found weren't guilt payments or loans, they were essentially blackmail in reverse. Marcus had been quietly funneling money to my parents for years, not because he owed them anything, but because he was terrified of what would happen to me if their lifestyle collapsed. Your parents live beyond their means, Sloane. Always have. The dealerships are profitable, but not enough to support their lifestyle. Your mother's design firm barely breaks even. Without the patent money, they'd lose everything, the house, the cars, the social status they cling to. And I was afraid that if that happened, they'd take it out on you. I felt sick. "So you've been funding my childhood to protect me from them. I've been funding your childhood because you deserve better than the chaos that would follow if they lost everything. But also because..." He paused, looking directly at me for the first time. "Because I've been saving for your future. Every dollar I sent them, I matched in a trust fund for you. For college, for whatever dreams you wanted to chase. The trust fund was real." Marcus showed me the documentation right there in the diner. 4 years of Harvard tuition, living expenses, and enough left over for law school if I wanted it. All funded by the patent money that should have been his from the beginning. "But there's a condition," he said, and my heart sank. "Your parents can never know about this. If they find out I've been planning your future independent of them, if they realize you'll be financially free after graduation." He didn't need to finish the sentence. I understood. That conversation changed everything. Suddenly, my parents' behavior made perfect sense. The resentment, the comments about me being just like Marcus, the growing distance. They weren't proud of my achievements, they were threatened by them. They saw me becoming independent, saw the intelligence that reminded them of the brother they'd betrayed, and they knew that someday I might start asking uncomfortable questions. The next 3 months were torture. I had to pretend everything was normal while watching my parents plan their exit strategy from my life. I caught Mom boxing up my childhood photos, claiming she was redecorating. Dad started making comments about how some kids just aren't ready for the real world after high school, and how tough love builds character. The worst part was watching them interact with Marcus at family gatherings. The fake smiles, the surface-level conversations, the way they'd change the subject whenever he asked about my college plans. He'd created this elaborate financial house of cards to protect me, and they were planning to kick me out anyway. Graduation day arrived like a funeral march. I gave my valedictorian speech about family, hard work, and bright futures, all while knowing it was the last time I'd stand in front of these people as their daughter. That night, I came home to find a single suitcase on my bed and a note on the pillow. "Sloane, you're 18 now, which means you're legally an adult. We've done our job raising you, and now it's time for you to make your own way in the world. We won't be supporting you financially anymore. There's $500 in cash in the suitcase. Use it wisely. We wish you the best. Mom and Dad." I sat on that bed holding the note and felt something shift inside me. The hurt was still there, but underneath it was something colder, sharper. They thought they were abandoning a helpless child. They had no idea they were creating their worst nightmare. The first call I made was to Marcus. The second was to Harvard admissions. By the end of the week, I was enrolled for the fall semester with a full ride courtesy of the trust fund my uncle had been building for years. But I didn't just want to survive. I wanted to thrive in a way that would make my parents' abandonment look like the biggest mistake of their lives. Harvard was a revelation. For the first time in my life, I was surrounded by people who valued intelligence over appearances, substance over status. I threw myself into my studies with the intensity of someone who had something to prove. Constitutional law, corporate litigation, intellectual property rights. I devoured every course like it was personal. And in a way, it was personal. Every case study about family businesses, every lecture about fiduciary duty, every assignment about corporate fraud felt like preparation for something bigger. I didn't know exactly what yet, but I could feel it building inside me like pressure in a volcano. Marcus and I developed a closer relationship than we'd ever had. He became the parent figure I'd never really had, offering guidance without manipulation, support without strings attached. He also became my mentor in ways that extended far beyond family dynamics. The patent case he told me during my sophomore year, it's not over. The statute of limitations for fraud is much longer than people think, especially when the fraud involves family members and ongoing damages. That's when he told me about the evidence he'd been collecting for 20 years. Bank records, email communications, witness statements from people who'd been present during the original patent discussions. He'd built an airtight case for fraud and theft, but he'd never pursued it because of me. "I couldn't risk your security," he explained. "But now you're secure. Now you have your own future. And now? Well, now I'm tired of letting my brother profit from my work while treating the most important person in both our lives like garbage." By my junior year, I was working part-time at a prestigious Boston law firm that specialized in intellectual property and corporate fraud. My supervisors were impressed enough to fast-track me into their summer associate program, and by senior year, I had a standing job offer waiting for me after law school. But I had other plans. The law firm I'd been working for had a branch office in Connecticut just 30 minutes from my hometown. When I graduated from Harvard, I didn't just accept their job offer. I negotiated to head up their new division, focusing on family business disputes and corporate fraud. It was a perfect fit for my skill set and my personal mission. Law school flew by in a blur of case law and mock trials. I graduated magna cum laude and passed the Connecticut bar exam on my first try. At 25, I was a licensed attorney with a specialty in exactly the kind of case I'd been preparing for my entire adult life. The investigation into my parents' business practices started small. A few public records requests, some routine financial audits, conversations with former employees and business partners. What I found was a pattern of behavior that went far beyond stealing from Marcus. My father's dealerships had been systematically overcharging customers for repairs using substandard parts while charging premium prices, and manipulating trade-in values to maximize profits. My mother's design firm had been billing clients for materials that were never purchased, inflating labor costs and taking kickbacks from suppliers. But the crown jewel was the patent money. 20 years of licensing fees that rightfully belonged to Marcus funneled through a complex web of shell companies and false documentation. It wasn't just theft, it was ongoing fraud on a massive scale. The more I dug, the more I realized that my parents hadn't just abandoned their daughter, they'd abandoned their humanity. They were so consumed with maintaining their lifestyle and status that they'd been systematically stealing from everyone around them. Marcus, their customers, their clients, even the IRS. Building the case took 2 years. I had to be careful, methodical, and above all, patient. Every document had to be verified. Every witness statement had to be airtight. Every piece of evidence had to be irrefutable. This wasn't just about justice. This was about complete and total vindication. By the time I was ready to move forward, I had enough evidence to destroy their businesses, their reputations, and their freedom. But I wanted something more than just legal victory. I wanted them to understand in the most public way possible exactly what they'd thrown away when they decided I wasn't worth keeping. That's when I heard about the 20-year high school reunion. The perfect opportunity to reunite with my old classmates, many of whom remembered me as the girl whose parents were so proud of her achievements. The girl who'd given that inspiring speech about family support and bright futures. The irony was too perfect to resist. I RSVP'd immediately. The months leading up to the reunion were like preparing for the most important trial of my career, because in many ways that's exactly what it was. I wanted everything to be perfect. The timing, the presentation, the evidence, and most importantly, the impact. My first step was reaching out to my old classmates through social media. I'd maintained a deliberately low profile since graduation, so most of them had no idea what I'd been up to for the past decade. As far as they knew, I'd simply disappeared after high school. Perfect. I started dropping subtle hints about my success photos from Harvard graduation, mentions of my law practice, casual references to major cases I'd won. Nothing too obvious, just enough to build intrigue. The responses were immediate and gratifying. Sloane Mitchell, I can't believe it's you. Girl, you look amazing. What have you been up to? Wait, you're a lawyer now. That's incredible. But the best responses came from people who remembered my parents. Several classmates mentioned how much they'd admired the close family relationship we'd had, how my parents had seemed so supportive and proud. A few even said they'd always wished their own parents were more like mine. If only they knew. Meanwhile, I was putting the finishing touches on my legal case. Marcus had officially retained my firm to pursue the patent fraud claim, which meant I could now operate as his attorney rather than just his niece. The professional distance gave me additional legal protections and made the whole thing feel more legitimate, less like a personal vendetta. The evidence was overwhelming. Beyond the original patent theft, I'd uncovered a 20-year pattern of financial fraud that stretched across multiple businesses and involved dozens of victims. Former employees came forward with stories of wage theft. Customers provided documentation of overcharging and fraudulent repairs, and suppliers confirmed the kickback schemes. But the piece de resistance was the IRS investigation I'd quietly initiated 6 months earlier. When federal tax investigators dig deep enough into someone's finances, they tend to find all sorts of interesting discrepancies. My parents' amended tax returns alone were going to cost them hundreds of thousands in back taxes and penalties. 3 weeks before the reunion, I had everything I needed to file both criminal and civil charges. But I held off. I wanted the reunion to be their last night of thinking they'd won, their final moment of believing they'd successfully erased me from their lives without consequences. I spent considerable time planning my appearance. The Armani suit was custom-tailored in charcoal gray, professional, powerful, and expensive enough that anyone who knew clothing would recognize the quality. I chose accessories that spoke of success without being flashy. A vintage Rolex Italian leather shoes, a briefcase that cost more than most people's monthly salary. But the real preparation was psychological. I practiced my demeanor in the mirror, perfecting the balance between confidence and restraint that would command respect without revealing my intentions too early. I wanted to seem successful and happy, not angry or vindictive. The best revenge, after all, is served with a smile. The week before the reunion, I received an unexpected call from my high school principal, Mrs. Henderson. She'd heard I was planning to attend, and wondered if I'd be willing to give a brief speech about my post-graduation success. Apparently, several alumni had mentioned my legal career, and the reunion committee thought it would be inspiring for current students to hear from a graduate who'd overcome challenges to achieve success. The irony was almost too perfect. Of course I agreed. I spent hours crafting that speech, making sure every word served my purpose. It would be a story about resilience, about overcoming abandonment, about building success from nothing, when the people who were supposed to love you most decide you're not worth keeping. It would be inspiring and heartbreaking, and completely devastatingly true. But most importantly, it would be delivered while my parents sat in the audience, probably expecting me to thank them for their tough love in preparing me for the real world. The night before the reunion, I called Marcus. He'd been my rock throughout this entire process, offering support and legal advice while letting me lead the charge on seeking justice for both of us. "Are you ready for tomorrow?" he asked. "I've been ready for 10 years, I replied. "But Marcus, after tomorrow, everything changes. Once I file these charges, there's no going back. Are you absolutely sure this is what you want?" His answer came without hesitation. "Sloane, they threw away the most extraordinary person I've ever known because they were too selfish and short-sighted to see your value. They've been stealing from me for 2 decades while treating you like garbage." Yes, I'm sure. That night I barely slept. Not from nerves, but from anticipation. Tomorrow, I would walk into that gymnasium as the girl they'd abandoned, but I'd leave as the woman who'd brought them to justice. The Westfield High Gymnasium looked exactly the same as it had 10 years ago, just decorated with balloons and draped in our school colors. Class of 2015 banners hung from the rafters and photo displays showed all of us in our cap and gown glory, young and full of hope for the future. I arrived fashionably late, wanting to make an entrance. The moment I walked through those doors, conversation stopped. It wasn't just the suit or the confidence, it was the transformation. The last time most of these people had seen me, I was 18, and uncertain about everything except my academic achievements. Now I moved like someone who owned every room she entered. Sloane Mitchell. The voice belonged to Jessica Torres, who'd been student body president. "Oh my God, you look incredible. What have you been up to?" And so it began. For the first hour, I worked the room like a politician, reconnecting with old friends and acquaintances, sharing carefully edited stories about my journey from abandoned teenager to successful attorney. People were fascinated, impressed, and more than a little curious about how I'd managed such a dramatic transformation. "Harvard Law, that's amazing. Your parents must be so proud," said Michael Chen, who'd been in my debate class. "Actually," I said with a mysterious smile, "my parents and I lost touch after graduation. Different life paths, you know how it is." The responses were always the same: surprise, confusion, and then awkward attempts to change the subject. Everyone remembered my parents as the picture-perfect couple who'd seemed so invested in my success. The cognitive dissonance was exactly what I'd hoped for. Around 8 o'clock, I spotted them. Richard and Caroline Mitchell entered the gymnasium like they owned it, dressed to the nines and wearing the same confident smiles they'd perfected decades ago. Dad had gained some weight and his hair was thinner, but he still carried himself like the successful businessman he pretended to be. Mom looked like she'd stepped out of a magazine, every detail perfect, from her designer dress to her professional makeup. They worked the room with practiced ease, accepting congratulations on their business success, sharing updates about their latest vacation to Europe, playing the role of the accomplished couple whose daughter had simply chosen to pursue her own path after graduation. I watched them for 20 minutes before making my move. When they were finally standing alone near the refreshment table, I approached with the same calm confidence I brought to closing arguments. "Hello, Mom." "Dad." The shock on their faces was everything I'd hoped for and more. Dad actually dropped his punch cup, and Mom's perfectly composed expression cracked just enough to reveal the panic underneath. "Sloane," Dad managed after a long moment. "This is unexpected?" "I'm sure it is," I replied smoothly. "I hope you don't mind me crashing your reunion. Technically, it's mine too." Other people started to notice the interaction. I could see former classmates watching curiously, probably wondering why this reunion between parents and daughter felt so tense. "You look..." Mom started, then stopped, clearly struggling with what to say. "Successful," I suggested helpfully. "Happy, like I didn't need your support after all." The nearby conversations were definitely slowing down now. People were starting to eavesdrop, sensing drama in the making. "Sloane, this isn't the place," Dad began, but I cut him off. "Actually, Dad, this is exactly the place. You see, in about an hour, I'm going to give a speech to everyone here about overcoming adversity and building success from nothing. I thought you might want to know what I'll be talking about." Before they could respond, Mrs. Henderson appeared with her microphone and overly bright smile. "Ladies and gentlemen, if I could have your attention, we have a very special treat tonight. One of our most accomplished graduates, Sloane Mitchell, has agreed to share her inspiring journey with us. Sloane graduated as our valedictorian and went on to Harvard University and Harvard Law School. She's now a successful attorney specializing in corporate fraud and family business disputes. Please give her a warm welcome." The applause was enthusiastic, and I noticed several people glancing between me and my parents with increasing curiosity. I took the microphone and walked to the center of the gymnasium, the same spot where I'd given my graduation speech 10 years ago. "Thank you, Mrs. Henderson, and thank you all for being here tonight. It's wonderful to see so many familiar faces." I paused, letting my gaze sweep across the crowd and land briefly on my parents. 10 years ago, I stood in this exact spot and gave a speech about family support and bright futures. Tonight, I want to tell you what actually happened after that speech ended. You could have heard a pin drop. Everyone was listening now, sensing that something significant was about to unfold. That night, I went home to find a suitcase on my bed and a note from my parents. The note informed me that since I was now 18, I was no longer their responsibility. There was $500 in cash and a suggestion that I use it wisely. No phone call, no conversation, no explanation, just abandonment. Gasps rippled through the crowd. People were looking at my parents now, confusion and shock evident on their faces. Now, some of you might be thinking that this was tough love, that they were teaching me independence. But what you don't know is that my parents had been planning this abandonment for months. What you don't know is that their entire lifestyle has been funded by money stolen from my Uncle Marcus through patent fraud. What you don't know is that they've been systematically defrauding their customers and clients for over 20 years. The gymnasium was completely silent now, except for the sound of my voice and the occasional whispered, "Oh my God." Tomorrow morning, I'll be filing criminal charges against Richard and Caroline Mitchell for fraud, theft, tax evasion, and racketeering. The evidence includes 20 years of bank records, email communications, and witness statements. The total amount of their theft exceeds $2 million. My parents' faces had gone from shock to horror to panic. Dad was shaking his head, and Mom looked like she might faint. But here's the beautiful part. I continued, my voice growing stronger. They threw me away because they thought I was a liability, a burden, someone who might eventually ask uncomfortable questions about their success. Instead, they created their worst nightmare, a Harvard-trained attorney with both the skill and the motivation to bring them to justice. The crowd was buzzing now, people turning to stare at my parents, phones coming out to record what was clearly becoming the most dramatic reunion in school history. So yes, Mrs. Henderson, this is indeed a story about overcoming adversity. It's about what happens when the people who are supposed to love you most decide you're not worth keeping. It's about building something real and meaningful from nothing. And it's about the fact that justice, while sometimes delayed, is never denied. I handed the microphone back to a stunned Mrs. Henderson and walked directly toward my parents. The crowd parted like the Red Sea, everyone desperate to hear what would happen next. "Sloane, please," Mom whispered, tears streaming down her face. "We can explain. No need," I said calmly. "You'll have plenty of opportunity to explain everything to the federal prosecutors. Oh, and Mom, Dad, you might want to call a lawyer. But not me. I'll be representing Uncle Marcus in the civil suit to recover his stolen patent rights." I turned to address the crowd one final time. "Enjoy the rest of your reunion, everyone. I have some paperwork to file." Walking out of that gymnasium was the most satisfying moment of my life. Behind me, I could hear the explosion of conversation as 200 people tried to process what they'd just witnessed. My phone was already buzzing with friend requests and messages from former classmates, but I ignored them all. I had work to do. True to my word, I filed the criminal charges first thing Monday morning. The media picked up the story immediately. Local business owners charged with massive fraud scheme made front-page news across Connecticut. But the headlines that really made me smile were the ones that focused on the family angle. Daughter seeks justice after parents' abandonment, and Harvard lawyer exposes parents' 20-year fraud. The legal proceedings moved swiftly. When you have 2 decades of documented evidence and multiple federal agencies backing your case, defendants don't have many options. My parents tried to fight the charges, initially hiring an expensive legal team and claiming I was conducting a vindictive prosecution motivated by personal grievances. Their lawyers quickly realized they were fighting a losing battle. The evidence was overwhelming, the paper trail was irrefutable, and the witness testimony was devastating. Former employees testified about systematic wage theft. Customers provided documentation of fraudulent charges, and financial experts outlined the complex money laundering scheme they'd used to hide Marcus's patent revenue. The IRS investigation alone yielded over $800, 0 inches back taxes and penalties. The civil suits from defrauded customers totaled another $1.2 million. But the crown jewel was Marcus's patent case. 20 years of stolen licensing fees plus interest and punitive damages came to just over $3.4 million. My parents' perfect life crumbled in a matter of months. The dealerships were seized to pay restitution, the design firm was shuttered, and their Greenwich mansion went into foreclosure. Dad received 18 months in federal prison, plus 5 years of probation. Mom got 12 months and community service, partly because she cooperated with prosecutors, and partly because her role was seen as secondary to Dad's. But the real justice wasn't in their punishment, it was in watching their reputation disintegrate. The same social circles that had once celebrated their success now whispered about their fraud. The same clients who had trusted them with major purchases and renovations now felt betrayed and humiliated. They'd built their identity on status and appearances, and I'd stripped away both. Marcus got his patent rights back along with substantial financial compensation for 20 years of theft. More importantly, he got public vindication. The local business journal ran a feature story about his invention and how his own brother had stolen credit for his work. At 62, he finally received the recognition he deserved. As for me, the reunion speech went viral within days. Someone had recorded it and posted it online, where it racked up millions of views and sparked thousands of discussions about family loyalty, personal responsibility, and the price of abandonment. I received interview requests from major networks, book deal offers from publishers, and speaking invitations from law schools across the country. But the response that meant the most came from other young people who'd been abandoned or rejected by their families. Hundreds of emails poured in from kids who'd been kicked out for being gay, for pursuing non-traditional careers, for refusing to conform to their parents' expectations. They found hope in my story, proof that you could build something meaningful even when the people who were supposed to love you decided you weren't worth keeping. The media attention also brought unexpected professional opportunities. My law firm's family business fraud division expanded rapidly as other victims came forward with similar stories. I became a specialist in cases involving family betrayal and corporate fraud, helping people seek justice when their own relatives had stolen from them or destroyed their lives for personal gain. Today, 5 years after that reunion, I'm a partner at one of Connecticut's most prestigious law firms. I own a beautiful home in Hartford, drive a car that I bought with money I earned through my own hard work, and wake up every morning knowing that everything I have is real and legitimate. My parents served their time and moved to Florida, where they live quietly on Social Security and whatever legitimate savings they had left. We haven't spoken since the trial, and I'm perfectly fine with that. Some bridges once burned should stay that way. Marcus and I have grown even closer. He's like the father I never really had, supportive without being controlling, proud without being possessive, loving without expecting anything in return. He was the first person I called when I made partner, and he'll be walking me down the aisle when I marry my fiancé next spring. The most important lesson I've learned is that family isn't defined by blood. It's defined by choice, loyalty, and genuine love. The people who truly care about you will never abandon you when things get difficult. They'll never throw you away when you become inconvenient. And they'll never steal from you while pretending to support you. I also learned that justice isn't always immediate, but it's always possible. Sometimes you have to be patient, strategic, and willing to play the long game. Sometimes you have to build your own power before you can challenge the people who wronged you. But if you're smart, determined, and morally right, you can absolutely prevail against people who think they're untouchable. Looking back, I'm almost grateful for what my parents did. Their abandonment forced me to become self-reliant in ways I never would have otherwise. Their betrayal taught me to value genuine relationships over superficial ones. Their fraud gave me a purpose and a career that I'm passionate about. In trying to destroy me, they actually created a stronger, more successful version of myself. So here's my question for all of you watching this. Have you ever experienced family betrayal that seemed insurmountable? Have you ever felt abandoned by the people who were supposed to protect you? How did you find the strength to rebuild and seek justice? I want to hear your stories in the comments below. Sometimes sharing our experiences helps others realize they're not alone in their struggles. If this story resonated with you, please hit that like button and share it with anyone who needs to know that abandonment isn't the end of the story. It's often just the beginning of a better one. Don't forget to subscribe for more stories about overcoming adversity and finding justice when the system seems stacked against you. Thank you for watching, and remember, sometimes the best revenge isn't just living well, it's living righteously and making sure the truth eventually comes to light. Family karma is real, and it always comes full circle. Here's to building the life you deserve, regardless of who believes you're worthy of it.